Joining us now is Associated Press international correspondent Philip Crowther. He is in Switzerland. Philip, who is there with you in Switzerland? Has anyone actually arrived? How is this looking? And do we know what parties are there? We are hearing reports that the Americans and Iranian delegations are potentially heading there, but we know there's this whole ecosystem of others who have been advising and been involved in these negotiations. Who do we expect to show up?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Who is actually here and who is planning to come? There are a lot of reports out there that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, is either here or on his way. We cannot confirm that independently. Steve Witkoff, the chief negotiator, would also be a key member of a U.S. delegation. He is rumored to be on his way. We cannot confirm that right now either. Here's a part that I can confirm. The Iranian foreign minister, who would be part of his delegation, in fact, would be heading his delegation to potential talks with the United States here in Switzerland. He is, well, in Tehran, and that's rather a long way away, meaning that, you know, nothing is going to be happening in the next few hours, I think is pretty safe to say. That doesn't mean that all parties are not going to be able to somehow get their agendas and schedules sorted out to all meet here at the same time, maybe as early as tomorrow, Sunday, maybe on Monday. We're talking about 4 parties here, by the way, who are expected to be here. We've already seen that the luxury resort just above Lucerne, where they are supposed to meet, it's already been branded, by the way. They're calling it the Lake Lucerne Summit. It includes the flags of the 4 participating countries, of course the United States, of course Iran, Pakistan as well as the moderator, and Qatar as also a key moderator, at least over the last few weeks. Let me give you another barometer. It's not the best in the world, but we've decided to stay, and any reporters who are going to leave today, well, they've decided to stay here as well, because it does look like things might be coming together here. And the main element hereof, why this official signing ceremony that was supposed to happen yesterday did not, apart from the fact that the document was already signed, the main stumbling block was that there was no ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. That appears to now exist. That was the big stumbling block for Iran. They now seem to be willing, if that ceasefire holds, to travel over here to Switzerland. In other words, it looks like talks might happen at the end of this week or the beginning of next.
Phil, let me just ask you about the sequencing here, and that's a word we've heard a lot of since the run-up to the signing of this memorandum. The memorandum itself, of course, calls for things to happen in prescribed order. What do we know of the way that these negotiations are likely to unfold, and sort of what these 4 parties, as you laid them out, are going to prioritize in those talks once they do get underway?
I'll tell you what, they're going to have to happen very, very quickly indeed. The comparison with the JCPOA, that's the nuclear deal with Iran that was signed during the Obama administration that Donald Trump as U.S. president exited, that's the comparison you have to make. It took a year and a half to negotiate that one. Here, the deadline is 60 days. That is obviously a very, very tall order. That is very difficult to achieve. You have to reach, and the memorandum of understanding that they've already signed, it wants to reach a solution to the Iranian nuclear program that everybody can agree to. In other words, one where Iran, again, and it's done this in the past, promises not to pursue a nuclear weapon, and where that is also essentially physically impossible. There are huge amounts of details to be discussed. Usually, when you come to these types of negotiations, there are different working groups. There is a legal working group. There's a political working group as well. That is, in theory, what would have to happen here. They still need to be established. There is so much work still to be done, and very little of that can be decided during, let's say, a day and a half of talks here in Switzerland. A long, long way still to go.
Philip, we do enjoy talking to you in front of large bodies of water, and the last time we were communicating, you were standing on the Strait, and so since you've been down there, I do want to ask you about this MOU. There's a 60-day agreement that there will be free passage, toll-free passage through the Strait, but following that, it seems more and more likely that Iran and possibly Oman will be getting together with this new Gulf Authority they're establishing to form some sort of, if not a tolling fee, now they're talking about charging a special insurance for ships to pass. Do you think that's a sticking point, or do you think that's something that is likely to happen after the 60 days, and this is something that Gulf allies and other allies are just going to have to tackle on their own, because it doesn't seem to be something the U.S. wants to hang up the rest of this agreement to debate about?
Yeah, I think you're right there that the devil is going to be in the details, but the most essential part here, certainly for the Trump administration, is the traffic is moving again in the Strait of Hormuz. That is something that the U.S. president wanted to make clear to people with this agreement that has now been signed, that he has managed to get Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and that it is not using what it had used during this war, which was essentially a toll booth system where tankers and the companies controlling them would have to pay a hefty amount of money to even be allowed through the Strait of Hormuz. That is not supposed to happen over these next 60 days, but as you mentioned, Iran might want these ships all to be insured, not necessarily pay for that immediately. Maybe after those 60 days, it looks like we've got a little bit of a grey area here. But the most important thing is that the promise in this memorandum of understanding is that the Strait of Hormuz would be reopened. It is. We can confirm that tankers are now moving again from the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz into the wider world and the worldwide oil market. Of course, there's still going to be so much left to be done. The installations in the Gulf countries that were damaged by drone and missile attacks, they still need to be repaired. Oil production has to be ramped up significantly. Natural gas production in Qatar, for example, their facilities were damaged as well. We're really not at the status quo element here yet. We're not quite where we were before this war broke out. But the most important part of this is that some parts of this agreement are already being implemented, and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is not necessarily the most important one. The most important one, I think it's safe to say, is that there is an extended ceasefire between the United States and Iran. But coming a close second is certainly that shipping is up and running again.